My husband brought another woman to his company's summer party and introduced her as his wife, but his boss made sure he paid for that lie. When the microphone clicked on and Richard's voice carried across the water like a starting signal, I realized I was about to watch my marriage end in front of 40 strangers holding champagne glasses. And some quiet part of me thought, finally, I want to tell you how I ended up on that pool deck wearing the emerald dress Tom once said made me look like trouble. Because none of this happened the way you might expect. It didn't begin with the party. It began 3 weeks earlier with a phone that suddenly wouldn't stop lying face down on a nightstand. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 36. I've worked as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company for 11 years, which means I've spent 11 years learning to notice when two stories don't line up, cracked windshields that don't fit the weather report, water damage that existed before the policy. People are terrible at keeping lies consistent, even when they've practiced them. I didn't realize that Tuesday in June would be the moment I applied 11 years of professional skepticism to my own husband. Tom and I had been married for 9 years. We had a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, who collected rocks and believed thunderstorms were the sky doing math. Tom worked in commercial sales for a mid-sized logistics company, Howard Freight Partners, reporting to a regional VP named Richard Howard Jr., the founder's son. Tom spoke about him with the careful respect people usually reserve for someone who controls their bonus checks. We met at a wedding neither of us really wanted to attend. A mutual friend, an open bar, and the kind of forced proximity that either creates nothing or somehow creates 9 years of marriage. Tom made me laugh at the worst possible moments during the speeches, during the bouquet toss, and I loved that about him for a long time. He was easygoing and low drama, the kind of man my mother called steady, which she meant as the highest compliment possible. I'd built my career slowly, starting with an associate's degree, taking an entry-level claims position at 24, then attending night classes for my adjuster's license at 27. By the time Lily was born, I was handling complicated cases, the ones involving conflicting witness statements and photo timestamps that didn't match the weather records. My supervisor used to joke that I had a talent for finding the version of a story people wanted to believe. I didn't think much about that phrase until it started applying to my own kitchen table. As far as I knew, we had an ordinary marriage. It wasn't perfect. Tom worked long hours. Sometimes I fell asleep before he got home and woke up to find his side of the bed already cold, as if he'd left before I even realized he was gone. But it was normal. We argued about ordinary things, whose turn it was to take Lily to the dentist, whether we could afford to renovate the kitchen this year or wait until next year. Nothing seemed like a warning. That's what makes this kind of situation so confusing. You don't get a clear warning shot. You get a Tuesday that looks completely ordinary, and only later do you look back and notice the cracks. It began with Melanie Ostrander, another mother from Lily's school, stopping me in the pickup. Party information had simply become confused. Maybe I was the kind of wife who searched for problems because problems were easier to solve than the vague loneliness that comes with 9 years of marriage running on autopilot. I was surprisingly good at creating explanations for someone else's behavior. Claims work rewards that skill, at least until it doesn't. Then I noticed the cologne. Tom had worn the same drugstore aftershave for 6 years. A bottle of Nautica he'd bought in 3 packs from Costco because he said changing scents felt like becoming a different person, which was the kind of strangely poetic thing he said maybe twice a year. That Wednesday, he came home smelling like something completely different. Cedar, with something floral underneath it. Expensive. New cologne. I asked while folding laundry, keeping my voice casual. Sample from a client dinner. A guy was giving out gift bags. He didn't look up. I checked. Howard Freight had no client events scheduled that week. I knew because I'd casually asked whether he needed his good shirt dry cleaned for one. He'd said no. There was nothing on the calendar. His phone had also started staying face down on the nightstand, something it had never done during our 9 years together. Once, when I picked it up simply to check the time, he crossed the room so quickly that I heard his knee hit the dresser. Batteries are basically dead, he said. I don't want the light waking you. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself many things that month. The credit card statement arrived on Sunday, just as it always did, and I almost left it unopened. We kept separate finances, but I handled the paperwork because I was better at catching errors, which was a not. which was another kind of irony I wouldn't understand until later. There was a charge from Larson and Vane Jewelers. $890. Tom hadn't said anything about it. I asked him about it over coffee, casually, as if it were an ordinary question. Anniversary is coming up, he said. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Our anniversary was in October. This was June. Early planning, he said when I pointed that out. You know me. I get anxious about forgetting things. I wanted to believe him. I really did. 9 years of marriage gives someone a lot of benefit of the doubt, and I was still giving mine away freely even though it was running out. But claims work teaches you something important. The story that needs the most follow-up explanations is usually the one falling apart under its own weight. Real stories don't require 3 separate explanations. They need one. I called Larson and Vane the next day during my lunch break, pretending I wanted to confirm a delivery address for a gift. The woman on the phone was friendly and completely unaware that she was giving me information I desperately needed. That was a ring resize, she said. Women's size 6 down to a 5. It should be ready for pickup at the end of the month. I don't wear a size 6. I've never worn a size 6. My hands went cold around the phone, and I had to sit in my car in the office parking lot for 11 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I told myself I needed more than a ring size. And a change in cologne. If I was wrong, if there was some explanation I hadn't considered, I'd have destroyed my marriage over a coincidence. So I did what I knew how to do for work. I built a file. I started noticing a name. It appeared once in a text preview that flashed across his lock screen while his phone was, for once, face up on the kitchen counter. Priya can't wait for Friday. Before he grabbed the phone, and the screen went black. I said nothing. I wrote the name on the back of a grocery receipt, the way you record evidence you're not ready to look at. Directly. Priya. I didn't know a Priya. Tom had never mentioned anyone named Priya. 3 days later, I called the front desk at Howard and Freight. I told them I was confirming a delivery for my husband's department and casually asked whether Richard had assigned anyone new to the quarterly reports Tom had supposedly been working late on. The receptionist said, I don't think Richard's team is doing quarterlies right now. That's normally a Q1 thing. You may be thinking of last spring. It was June. There was no report. There had never been a report. Tom had created an entire late-night excuse around a task that, according to his own company, wasn't happening. My hands were trembling when I hung up. Not because I was surprised anymore, but because of confirmation. There is a particular kind of sick dizziness that comes from being right about something you desperately wanted to be wrong about. I found the 5th piece by accident, which is often how you discover the worst things. Tom kept an old gym bag in the trunk of his Honda Accord. It was the kind of bag that had stayed in a car for years, practically forgotten, filled with a mildew-smelling towel and a pair of cleats he hadn't worn since a rec league season 2 summers earlier. It was leftover evidence of an older version of Tom, from before whatever this was. I was loading groceries on a Thursday, moving the bag aside to make room for a case of sparkling water when a folded paper slipped from the side pocket and landed face up on the driveway. Concrete. It was a hotel folio. The Wren House, a boutique hotel downtown that I'd never visited, the kind with a rooftop bar I'd seen on a billboard and thought, vaguely that Tom and I should try someday. 2 nights in May for $12. Paid with a card I didn't recognize. Not our joint account. Not his personal checking account. Something completely different. A card ending in numbers I'd never seen on any statement that had crossed my desk. I stood in the driveway holding the hotel folio in one hand and Lily's soccer cleat in the other, while the groceries slowly warmed in the back seat. And suddenly I understood that my husband had a financial life I knew nothing about. A card. A hotel room. A rooftop bar. A woman named Priya who couldn't wait for Friday. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect tears to come first. They came later, in the shower, where I could pretend the water was the only thing running down my face. In the driveway, I felt something closer to the calm you experience in the center of a storm. It was the focused calm of someone who had finally stopped guessing and started building a case. I put the folio into my purse, brought the groceries inside, and prepared dinner as if it were any other Thursday. By that point, I understood that reacting immediately wasn't going to get me anything except an argument I couldn't win with emotions alone. I needed evidence. Feelings don't hold up in a filing. Denise would say those exact words to me a week later, but part of me already understood them while standing in that driveway. I'm not naturally confrontational, but I am methodical. And 11 years of adjusting claims had taught me that the worst thing you can do when you suspect fraud is reveal it before you've documented everything. So I didn't yell. I didn't throw the folio at him. I opened a password-protected folder on my laptop, backed it up to a drive Tom didn't know existed, and began putting everything inside. Screenshots of the credit card statement, a photo of the hotel folio, the date and time of the receptionist's comment about the report, a note about the ring resize from size 6 to 5, the name Priya, and the date of the text. Preview. I also followed the advice of a friend from my adjusting days who had gone through her own divorce and contacted a family law attorney. Her name was Denise Okafor, a family law attorney with 19 years of experience, most of it involving contested divorces and asset division. Her office was on the 4th floor of a downtown building. It had warm lighting and law books that looked genuinely used instead of arranged for appearance. There was also a tissue box on the corner of her desk, placed with the casual precision of someone who had learned exactly where clients needed it. I sat across from her on a Tuesday. Somehow, everything that summer seemed to happen on Tuesdays, and I told her everything. The party, the cologne, the ring resize, and the name I'd seen on the lock screen. She listened without showing any surprise, writing notes in a shorthand I couldn't read upside down. Somehow, that helped more than sympathy would have. I didn't want comfort yet. I wanted someone to believe me, but more importantly, to believe me accurately. Someone whose job was to understand the difference between a marriage going through problems and a marriage that was already finished. You're doing the right thing by documenting everything first, she told me as she capped her pen. I see many people come in here angry, but with no evidence, and anger doesn't move a case forward. Judges care about timelines. Emotion doesn't hold up in a filing. Paper does. She also recommended that I speak with a private investigator if I wanted independent confirmation before taking action, something that would stand up if things became contentious, especially when custody scheduling for Lily was involved. I hired Marcus Feld, a licensed private investigator with 14 years of experience in matrimonial surveillance. Before that, he'd spent 8 years as a police officer. He was completely unglamorous, which I found reassuring. He was a man in a golf shirt who discussed patterns of behavior the same way I discussed patterns in insurance claims. No trench coat and no dramatic attitude, just a legal pad and a level of patience that I found almost calming after weeks of noticing everything without being able to prove anything. I'm not going to promise you anything dramatic, he told me during our first call. Most of this job is confirming what people already know in their gut. I just put a timestamp on it and make it real in a way that your gut alone can't. He explained the process clearly. Legal surveillance from public locations, no trespassing, no wiretapping, nothing that could be thrown out or, worse, get me into legal trouble myself. The evidence that holds up is boring, he said. Photographs, timestamps, receipts. Leave the drama to the divorce, not the investigation. Over the next 10 days, Marcus confirmed that Tom had met a woman named Priya Anand, 29, who worked in marketing for a company 2 floors below Howard Freight, in the same office building on 4 separate occasions, including one overnight stay at the Wren House. He took photographs from a parking structure across the street. The timestamps matched almost exactly with the nights Tom had claimed he was buried in the report that never existed. There was also a trail of receipts that matched nearly perfectly with the hotel folio I'd found in the gym bag, including the room service charge for 2 coffees the next morning. I want to be direct with you, Marcus said as he handed me a manila folder thick enough to make a small, unpleasant sound when it landed on Denise's desk. This is enough for a filing. More than enough. There was one more thing I needed before Friday, and it wasn't legal. It was personal. I needed to know whether Tom had also lied to Richard. I needed to know whether this was a secret he was hiding from his boss, just as he was hiding it from me, or whether the company itself had somehow absorbed the lie, the way institutions sometimes do when a senior employee's personal life becomes inconvenient to acknowledge. I called Howard Freight's HR department and spoke with a woman named Officer. No, not an officer. A name I want to get right, because credentials matter here. Deborah Aldrich, Director of Human Resources, 12 years with the company. I didn't accuse Tom of anything. I simply asked whether spouses were normally invited to the summer party and whether there was an official RSVP list. Of course, Deborah said it was tracked through their events coordinator. Every employee's +1 was recorded for catering purposes. Would it be possible to see who Tom Whitfield RSVP'd with? I asked. I'm his wife. I want to make sure the seating is correct. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough for me to know before she said anything else that something in her records didn't match what I just told her. I'll have to check and call you back, she said carefully. She never called back, but 2 days later, I received a text from Melanie. Weird thing. I saw the RSVP sheet at the coordinator's desk when I dropped off cupcakes. Tom's +1 wasn't listed as Claire. It said, Priya W. I thought it was a typo, but I wanted you to know just in case. Priya W. Not Priya on it. Priya Whitfield, my last name. He hadn't simply brought another woman to the party. He had RSVP'd for her as his wife using my married name at a company event where several of my own friends would be sitting at tables watching her use it. I sat with that text for a long time. Then I texted Melanie back. Thank you. I'm going to the party. I dropped Lily at my mother's, kissed her forehead, and told her I loved her more than usual. In the particular way you do when you know you're about to make a decision that could change her life, even if she won't understand the reason for years. I drove home and stood in front of my closet longer than I care to admit. I picked the emerald wrap dress, the one Tom once said made me look like trouble. Good. Tonight, I wanted to be trouble. I entered the address into my phone and drove until the houses became larger and the hedges became taller. Richard's home on Bayest Lane was lit up like a wedding. Music drifted over the fence, and the pool glowed blue against the dark. I parked and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, feeling the particular stillness of someone about to do something that couldn't be undone. Then I walked inside like I belonged there, because I did. A man in a charcoal suit greeted me at the gate, polished and friendly. Welcome. I'm Richard. And you are? Claire, I said. Tom's wife. His smile didn't simply fade, it vanished. Tom's wife. Yes, why? Richard looked toward the check-in table, and I watched something change in his expression. The look of a man doing quick, uncomfortable calculations. I thought the woman who came in with Tom was his wife. The music continued playing. The pool continued glowing. Somewhere behind me, someone laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. What woman? I asked, even though I already knew. Richard didn't respond immediately. That silence told me more than an explanation could have. My assistant handled check-in. He finally said, but Tom is on the list, and the woman with him is listed as his wife. I found Tom at the bar 2 minutes later, laughing with a drink in one hand, completely relaxed, like a man who had nothing to worry about. He hadn't noticed me yet. Then his eyes moved toward the opposite side of the pool, and his entire expression softened in a way I recognized. The same way he used to look at me early in our marriage before that softness turned into routine, and eventually into whatever this had become. I followed his gaze. I couldn't see her yet, but Richard could, and his jaw tightened as he watched Tom's expression change. Tom's eyes eventually came back around, scanning the crowd like people do at parties, and then they landed on me. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Claire. His voice cracked. What the hell are you doing here? Having a drink, I said. Meeting your very charming boss. His hand moved toward my wrist before stopping, curling into a fist instead. His eyes immediately shifted to Richard, and I saw a fear in him I genuinely never witnessed before. He wasn't afraid of me, I realized. He was afraid of being seen. Not here, he whispered. Not in front of Richard. I knew about this party before I put this dress on, Tom. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For 9 years, I had watched this man talk his way out of parking tickets, uncomfortable silences, and one especially bad Thanksgiving with my mother. Now he had nothing to say. I turned back toward Richard, who was holding 2 untouched champagne glasses and watching Tom the way someone watches something slowly fall apart. I think it's time I met my husband's other wife, I said. ISTA. I said. I started walking toward the other side of the pool. Richard caught my arm. Not roughly, more like a man trying to prevent a crash. He could still somehow redirect what was happening. Wait, he said. I have a better idea. He walked directly to the small stage near the water, picked up the microphone, and tapped it twice. The music stopped. Every head turned. Sorry to interrupt, Richard said, looking across the crowd until his eyes settled on someone near the bar. His voice was tight, almost amused, almost angry. Would you mind coming up here? I think it's time we all met. I want to be clear about what happened next because it wasn't the movie version. Nobody threw a drink. Nobody screamed. What happened was quieter, and I think it was worse for Tom than anything dramatic could have been. Priya walked toward the stage in a pale blue dress, clearly confused, looking at Tom for some kind of signal he obviously couldn't give her. She was younger than I'd expected and older than I wanted her to be. Old enough to have known, I decided as I watched her expression that this wasn't an innocent mistake. Richard held the microphone toward her, then pulled it back at the last moment, like a man reconsidering his approach halfway through. Actually, he said, let me ask the question instead of making this into a bigger thing. He looked at Priya, then at Tom, and finally at me. He gave me a small apologetic nod, as if he understood whose evening this really was. Priya, when you RSVP'd, our coordinator listed you as Tom's wife. Is that accurate? The pool lights hummed. Someone's ice cracked inside a glass. Priya. Priya looked at Tom, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. And I watched her realize in real time that he wasn't going to. That's what he told me to put, she said quietly. And I felt something in my chest that surprised me. It wasn't triumph. It was closer to pity. It sat carefully beside a much larger amount of anger that I wasn't prepared to confront in front of 40 people. Richard nodded slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't create a scene beyond what had already happened. He simply placed the microphone down, walked over to Tom, and spoke quietly enough that I only heard fragments. Something about my house, my event, and my name on the invitation. And you brought this here, he said louder to the party, because I understood then that he wasn't only embarrassed for me. He was embarrassed as a host, as a man whose event had been used as cover for something he clearly found deeply unacceptable. Folks, I think we're going to pause the music for a minute. Please help yourselves to the bar. It was a host's instinct, even in the middle of an uncomfortable situation, to keep his guests comfortable. He turned to me. Claire, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know I said. That's sort of the point. I didn't stay for the rest of the party. I didn't need to. I'd gotten what I came for. Not revenge, exactly. Though I won't pretend that some part of me didn't take satisfaction in seeing Tom's expression when Priya admitted that's what he told her to put. What I'd gotten was confirmation in front of witnesses, with the company's own HR tracked guest list serving as documentation of exactly what I'd spent 3 weeks discovering on my own. I called Denise the next morning. She filed for divorce on my behalf 11 days later, using Marcus's surveillance report, the credit card statements, the hotel folio, and one detail she said she'd never seen before in 18 years of practice, a printed corporate event RSVP list as Exhibit C. Judges love a paper trail, she told me again on the phone. You handed them one gift wrapped. Tom briefly tried to argue that the affair had only really started a few weeks before the party, as though a shorter timeline made the lies about the quarterly report, the ring resize, and the hotel folio from May somehow less intentional. By then, he'd hired his own attorney, a younger man who kept using the phrase misunderstanding in a way that made Denise's eyebrows rise slightly every time. Denise didn't have to argue very hard against it. The dates spoke for themselves, arranged in a timeline exhibit that made the entire thing look less like a marriage falling apart and more like a case file, which by then it essentially was. There was one mediation session when Tom quietly asked whether I'd always been planning this, whether the folder, the investigator, and the entire documented case had been prepared with some cold, deliberate intention. I told him the truth. I hadn't planned anything except understanding what was actually happening inside my own home. The planning, I said, was yours. Mine was simply paying attention. Deborah Aldrich, Howard's HR director, called me a week after the party. I don't think she was required to, but it was a decent thing to do. She carefully explained that Howard Freight had a written policy against employees using company events for what she described as non-work-related deceptive conduct affecting other staff, and that Tom's situation was being reviewed internally, separately from anything happening between us. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. 2 months later, Melanie mentioned during casual pickup line conversation that Tom no longer worked at Howard. She didn't say he'd been fired. She didn't have to. I already understood enough about how these situations usually work. Richard sent me a card. Of all things, it was handwritten and slightly stiff, the kind of gesture a formal man makes when he isn't sure what else to do. I run good parties. I don't like when people use them as a lie. I'm sorry mine got used that way. Your daughter deserves better. And so do you. I kept it in the same folder as the divorce paperwork. That felt strange until I realized it was, in its own way, the first honest document anyone connected to that night had given me. The divorce was finalized in December. I got the house. Tom got every other Wednesday and alternating weekends with Lily, which Denise assured me was standard, appropriate, and, more importantly, actually in Lily's best interest. Whatever I felt about her father, she still needed one. Lily still collects rocks. A few months after everything settled, she once asked why Daddy didn't live with us anymore. I told her the truth in the simplest, gentlest version I could. That sometimes grown-ups make choices that mean they can no longer live together, that it wasn't anything she had done, and that both of us loved her exactly the same as before. She nodded in the serious way 7-year-olds nod when they've decided to accept an answer, even if they don't fully understand it yet, and returned to sorting quartz from granite. On the kitchen table, I still work in claims. I'm better at it now, if I'm honest. There is a particular clarity that comes from applying your professional skepticism to the one place you never expected to need it, and then surviving it. I don't know what happened to Priya. I've deliberately avoided looking. I kept the emerald dress. I don't wear it often, but it's still in the closet, pressed toward the back. Every so often, I see it and remember standing at that gate, telling a stranger my name as if it were still completely, unquestionably mine. It still is.